do we have any credible leadership left in our country? Anthony Albanese has climbed onto the wrong horse, and now his polling figures mirror those of Kevin Rudd at the beginning of Rudd's demise. The key issue here is voter satisfaction. These polls are invariably spot on. In a short space of time, Albanese's voter satisfaction has fallen 12 percentage points. He's rightly paying the price for a divisive referendum proposal, ignoring the plight of Australian voters facing horrendous cost of living pressures. I've said repeatedly, and I'll say it again, David Cameron threw everything at the Brexit referendum in Britain. He lost. Within days, he walked to the front of number 10 Downing Street and he resigned. What will Mr Albanese do? The public have had a gutful. Kevin Rudd argued that the great moral challenge of our time was climate change. Tony Abbott said way back in 2011, and it can be said now of the Albanese government, as was then said of the Rudd government, this is a government which is preparing to put at risk our manufacturing industry, to penalise struggling families, to make a tough situation worse for millions of households right across Australia, and for what? To make not a scrap of difference. Tony Abbott said in 2011, to make not a scrap of difference to the environment any time in the next 1,000 years. Tony Abbott, what a leader. Anthony Albanese's voter satisfaction is in free fall. The referendum will fail. What then for the Prime Minister? What then for the corporate Australia and their disgraceful waste of shareholders' money in backing the Yes campaign, but doing no homework whatsoever about what it means? They wouldn't be able to answer 2 or 3 questions. The language in this last week, now be careful, has shifted to the fact that this voice is about recognition. I'm sorry, that is a lie, spelt capital L, capital I and capital E. This is not about recognition. This is about a voice with extraordinary powers. As I said yesterday at a constitutional convention in Sydney, the Prime Minister is not now talking about the voice. That car's crashed. He's talking about recognition, this warm little recognition. This is not about recognition. This is about a voice, 27 unelected Aboriginal Australians, who'll be able to make representation on any issue, on anything to the Parliament and to the executive government. Representations on welfare, resources, health, education, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, foreign affairs, defence. This is what this referendum is about, a voice. And no one can predict what it would do, backed by a massive bureaucracy, or what it would prioritise. Those who vote yes obviously are wanting to create a new chapter in our Constitution that creates an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. The Indigenous voice champion, Professor Megan Davis, a professor of law, how the hell did she get that, has said the voice can speak, quote, to all parts of government, from Reserve Bank to Centrelink. And Professor Megan Davis, the champion of the voice argument, said openly the Parliament will not be able to, quote, shut the voice up, unquote. I said earlier, it's unfashionable, not for me, but for some, to quote Donald Trump. He said in a splendid speech in 2020, quote, the left is attempting to divide Americans by race in the service of political power. That's what this referendum is about, dividing our country by race in the service of political power. He further said, by viewing every issue through the lens of race, they want to impose a new segregation, and we must not allow that to happen. Donald Trump. He's the only person saying it. Well, not quite. Tony Abbott's saying it. Jacinta Price is saying it. Warren Mundine is saying it. 3 wonderful Australians. Giving special powers to a group based on ancestry and colour. It's not on. The UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination and Australia's Racial Vilification Act prohibit racism on the basis of race, colour, descent, national or ethnic origin. None of that should be at play in any work of government. Now remember, I've told you before, we've got 3,278 Aboriginal corporations. 3,000, there they are up there. Have a look. Get your phone out, take a picture of them. Leave it up there. 3,278 Aboriginal corporations, 243 native title bodies. Read it with me. 48 land councils, 35 regional councils, over 122 Aboriginal agencies. I mean, God help me. We don't have any voices, do we? I mean, 3 advisory bodies, 145 health organisations. I hope you're photoing that with mobile phone, 11 federal Aboriginal MPs. Taxpayers give, we left that off the graphic there, but it means that taxpayers give $100 million a day. $100 million a day, $40 billion a year for direct support to Aborigines. Expenditure per Aborigine in 2015-16 was almost $45,000 per person, compared to $22,000 for those other poor buggers that actually roll up their sleeves and pay tax. The Prime Minister of Australia and corporate Australia have read from the wrong songbook. I congratulate Simon Fenwick, a generous businessman who's accused corporate Australia of misreading the national mood on the voice to Parliament and warning that conservative viewpoints were being deliberately stamped out of the nation's boardrooms. Dead right. Or people like me cancelled. He said that wealthy donors to so-called progressive causes, I hate that word because they are actually regressive people, they didn't face, he said, the same stigma or backlash as conservative donors. Peter Fenwick said he didn't miss. Mike Cannon-Brookes is willing to donate to fashionable causes. He finds little or no backlash in most of the mainstream media. But if you donate to conservative causes, he said, there's an aggressive backlash, and the so-called progressives are very aggressive and cunning at targeting this. In terms of CEOs of the publicly listed ASX 200, cop this. Mr. Fenwick said, I don't believe there is a single no of CEOs. He said, how could so many CEOs read the temperature so badly on the voice? He said, what gives them the right to think that they speak for the shareholders, customers and staff? He said, I hope this is the start of a process of focusing on bread and butter issues and running their companies, unquote. Well, the figures are there. Support for the Indigenous voice to Parliament and executive government has further weakened. Labor's primary vote has slipped to its lowest level since the election, when it was only 32%. And interestingly, support amongst younger voters for the Yes campaign has fallen under 50%. Hopefully they won't submit to the bullying and the untruths in the days ahead. Look, the reality is simple. The Prime Minister has failed to energise the nation. Labor is suffering political damage, and so it should. The Labor leader has expended his political capital on an issue that has divided the country. As I just said in the latest Newspoll, more 18 to 34-year-olds for the first time say they intend to vote no rather than vote yes. Their strongest reason for opposing the referendum was the belief that it favoured one group of Australians over another. The second doubt was obviously that it won't help solve the problems facing Indigenous Australians. The Prime Minister Albanese and Labor leader has hitched his wagon to the Yes campaign. There must be question marks now over his political future.